Welcome to this week's edition of the 6-5 Live. I'm Patrick Moorhead with Moor Insights Strategy, and I'm joined by my ever-present and awesome co-host, Daniel Newman with Futurum Research. How you doing, Daniel?
Hey, how are you? The 6-5 podcast, 6-5 Live. We're live on TV. We're on the air. You can download us on Apple. You can watch us on YouTube. Pretty soon we'll be streaming to you live by different channels. But yeah, we're taking a little pivot. It's a pandemic pivot, you could say, but we need you to be able to see our faces sometimes and not just hear us. They do say, Pat, we do have a face for radio.
That's right. My family tells me that all the time. And next time I'm going to bring a little bit of makeup to take the shine off. And by the way, apologies for the background, but what's behind me is an 8K TV that's going to be my new background for the show. And my digital twin, Daniel, picked up a very similar model. So hopefully we'll be looking a lot cooler with better background. So we may be live and video and audio, not audio only, but the format is pretty much the same. We take 6 handpicked topics that we're going to cover for 5 minutes each. We don't do news. You can get news everywhere. What we're big on is analysis, getting into the deeper meaning of what these things actually mean. But before I dive in, I want to give you our standard disclaimer, which is this show is for information and entertainment purposes only. We will talk about publicly traded companies on this show, but don't take that as investment advice. Get a professional. Don't listen to us on that. Anyways, let's dive in here. So first off, first topic of the day, AWS. I wrote a Forbes article about AWS and its SaaS offerings. And I think most of us know AWS for its IaaS. It has close to 70% market share in IaaS. Not as much in PaaS and SaaS. But what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about 3 applications that really came to the surface during COVID-19. The first is Amazon Connect. So think of a call center and the ability to do UCaaS essentially without having to have anything on-prem. And if you want to read my blog, I'll plug it on Forbes. Daniel, you can plug it too if you'd like. But essentially, they've told stories, whether it's hospitals that have been set up, but taking companies that had 1,000 plus people on-prem in a call center and moving them out immediately. And I think that's pretty cool. They're not the only person out there. I mean, you have 8x8, you've got Ring Central, but I still think it's pretty cool. And quite frankly, company doesn't get enough love for those. The other one's Amazon Chime. You know, Daniel, you and I have been talking about, Zoom, Cisco WebEx, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams. But believe it or not, you may not know this, but Amazon actually has a collaboration product, and it's called Chime. I've only used it when doing conference calls with Amazon, but interestingly enough, it has some of the biggest security features that are out there. 256 AE, unlike Zoom, who got really run through the ringer. It does actually have end-to-end encryption, which is pretty awesome. One thing I was really impressed with, though, Daniel, was how many compliance programs that they're certified on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 15 U.S. certifications that they have for security and compliance. Really impressed. The final is Amazon Workspaces. Is essentially taking your Windows desktop and streaming it anywhere that you want to go. And Amazon, it's funny, I had to get permission to use this, which I thought was pretty cool. But Amazon actually used this to get hundreds and thousands of its own employees up and running when they had to go work from home, and they're onboarding even new folks. So pretty cool. In an area, and Daniel, I know you track SaaS more than I do.
Yeah, so Amazon and AWS in general has been sort of seen as a core to edge stack, right? IaaS, PaaS, with SaaS kind of being its least penetration and least focus. But the company has started to expand, and we're seeing it on all sides. I kind of look at Microsoft was the SaaS that went back to the infrastructure. Google has been the platform company that spread its wings into IaaS and has had a number of SaaS offerings. And unquestionably, AWS has built its world around infrastructure. The company has the customer base, the brand, the reputation now that anything it wants to play in, it certainly can have an impact. It's funny, I was talking to Business Insider not that long ago, and I said, if I could see anyone acquiring like a Slack or a Zoom, I said I could totally see AWS doing it. Not because Chime doesn't work well, and as you mentioned, it actually maybe even has some capabilities that other platforms and other softwares do not, but because AWS is kind of, I think they're kind of ripe to make a big splash in SaaS. So I don't know that this is the big splash, but it's great to see the company sort of drinking its own champagne, eating its own dog food, using its own tools, and showing, Pat, that it has the capability to build software platforms and software as a service that enterprises could adopt and use.
Yeah, I was really impressed that they even gave me a peek inside to what's going on and what they've been doing with COVID. One of the big differentiators on Chime that none of the collaboration folks that you and I have been covering is they have an SDK. So if you're Bank of America and you want to put video into your application, they have a Chime SDK that offers you all those capabilities. Another little secret, Daniel, do you know the IaaS that Zoom runs on? It's AWS IaaS. Imagine that.
Well, given the choices of a large-scale collaboration platform, it's actually not really surprising, is it?
No, it's not.
It's kind of like a retailer running on Azure.
Isn't it funny how AWS wins when others win? I love those type of business models, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's crazy.
Yeah. So let's jump into the next topic here. IBM Q1 earnings. Arvind just took control, but that doesn't mean that he had the boat. He had the cloud boat when Q1 was happening. But this is the first time that he was able to actually go to the street. Daniel, how did IBM do?
Can you imagine being Arvind Krishna, newly minted CEO, 2 weeks onto the job, going on and saying, hey, I'm going to change the pace. I'm going to show up on our earnings calls, which is something that Ginny Rometty didn't do. And I'm going to start participating. But by the way, we have no clue what's going to happen now with COVID. So we're going to withdraw our guidance. And IBM only gives guidance for the year. What a crazy situation. I mean, you have to imagine the man had a significant role to step into when he was first announced, and coming into this, you could never have expected. He could never have expected to start like this. So let's just talk really quickly. The company actually came in at a $1.84 a share, which was a 4-cent beat on what was expected. It came up a little light on revenue, 17.62. Was what was expected. And I think they came in at 17.57. So within about 50 million of hitting their revenue numbers. Now, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that itself, but here's the thing. You listen to the news and it's all out Armageddon. The world's going to end. Companies are going to be failing left and right. Every big company is about to go under. Sell all your stocks, buy a plot of land in New Zealand, a bunker, whatever it is they're telling you to do. But it's been interesting this week with IBM being the first of the tech companies to kind of see the lead that it hasn't been bad yet. Now, the caveat here is that the next quarter will be more telling. The next quarter will be more telling because this quarter only really had a month of the worst of it. But we did have China baked in here. So for companies that, China was down most of the first quarter, and China is a very large economy with a very big influence in tech. But as we're starting to see earnings come out, the first quarter was not terrible for most companies, and including IBM. IBM actually saw almost a 20% growth in cloud. It won its 2 largest Red Hat deals. It's paid down about over the last year $9 billion in the debt it created when it acquired Red Hat. It created over $11 billion in free cash flow. So the company's doing okay. Some of its transactional software business started to fall off during the late part of March, and I expect that to continue into this next quarter. But I would say with 60% of the company's revenues being recurring and most of their clients being the largest enterprises on the planet, the companies that are being backstopped by the federal government, backstopped by the bailouts and the various different QE and different things that are going on with investment grade buybacks and purchases, IBM will be in good shape. I don't think it's going to be a great next quarter for almost any company, unless maybe you're Zoom or Chipotle. But I do think that overall, IBM has had a good quarter, nothing to wince at. If the next quarter is tough and the stock really falls, it could end up being a really good value. Of course, we're not advising anyone to buy anything, but mostly the right parts of their business are growing, especially with that focus on cloud. And on it'd be good to mention also AI is a big focus with only about 5% market penetration. Pat?
Yeah, those were some good points. And honestly, I was wondering where you were going. We're going to go with that because I didn't have enough time to tune into these earnings. But one thing I was struck at is you're right. I mean, they had 1 month where it was heavily hit. I think we're going to see some surprises next quarter where we're going to see some ridiculous increases in certain areas that needed expansion. I mean, there are a ton of mainframers out there. And by the way, I have to give credit to the IBM Z team and the storage team, which overall they grew hardware 10% year on year, and that when you match with the decline in power meant that Z and storage were probably up 15, maybe even 20%. Which it's mainframes, folks. Okay,
they do have the new product cycle though.
Exactly. Yeah, the Z15 is just kicking in there.
It's positive, and I had the I had the honor of going on and talking to Bloomberg about it, so I had to get versed up real quickly. So I've been through the depths of it. It's funny though because you never know when you go on those shows and talk. So I was all ready for IBM. Spent 2 minutes talking about IBM, and then they hit me up on Microsoft, Amazon, and Zoom, which I hadn't really had any time to prep for at all. But this is why you got to wake up, Pat, when you do what we do. We got to read every day because you never know what you might have to talk about at any given moment.
Exactly. Good stuff. So that's IBM earnings. Let's move to the next topic. HP introduced new creator laptops. And for anybody who's been paying attention to where some of the margin still is in the PC industry, it's in gaming. It's in thin and light commercial, and it's in I would call it a relatively new, fresh segment is creators. And whether it's you're involved in video editing, music, you're an application programmer, you're a 3D designer, and that can either be at a company or even doing some sort of a gig type of economy. You've seen a lot of companies, even like Nvidia, who came out with a special creator edition, have special creator series drivers to be able to take advantage of this opportunity. And what we saw HP come out with were what I thought is the best alternatives to a MacBook Pro that I've ever seen. So 2 lines. First of all is a consumer line that is called Envy. And big GPUs, big CPUs, and color perfect version of the display. And anybody who's a creator knows 100% DCI P3 wide color gamut is a big deal. Okay, I am not a video creator, but I know people who are, like my son, and he happens to think this is a really big deal. The other offering is what I could call a workstation class, and those are called ZBooks. And what separates ZBooks from these new Envies are software certifications. So there are certain workstation applications, like Dassault, as an example, that require certification. And that typically comes with an NVIDIA Quadro or a high-end commercial Radeon Pro. This go around, the company is pretty much all NVIDIA GPUs on the high end. And what I'm really impressed with is they've straddled the MacBook Pros, where people have other manufacturers have kind of taken this tiptoe method into the market. In fact, HP even borrowed Apple's lower left-hand corner keyboard layout to make it even easier for designers to do their stuff. I've written a blog up if you want to check this out.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Pat. And as you and I are building out our studios, by the way, what in the world is that behind you right there?
Just an 8K 65-inch. I'm sick of going from tool to tool. Some have backgrounds, some don't. Some do edge detection well. Some require a green screen. I know both you and I were considering going out and buying those pull-up,
step and repeat.
Yeah. Thank you. I know to go to you for those types of things. But anyways, I want to eliminate any of the ambiguity, put the background that I want when I want it. The 8K 65, it's last year's model, so it wasn't prohibitively expensive. And you and I are going to be doing some digital twinning on background, because I think you have one that comes in tomorrow.
Yeah, I do. I have the same thing. We'll be setting them up as our digital backgrounds. So no more gray walls or office cubicle looks in our live. We're going to take this thing up a level. Excited about that. But the only reason I actually even mentioned that was because part of my up leveling too is a new creator notebook. And so, Pat, I'm excited about that. I'm excited you talking about this. So, because I'm going to go very seriously look at this HP Envy. I know when I told you I was looking at getting that new 16-inch MacBook, you gave me some smackbook in response that told me, no, you need to look at this. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at this Envy. It sounds like a powerhouse. Haven't had a lot of time to investigate it, so I can't give a lot of comment on it yet. But the next time you see us broadcasting or tri-casting, like you're kind of seeing right now, you might see me on that actual HP Envy commercial edition.
The one thing I was surprised at, Daniel, that HP with the Envy didn't bring at their high-end Envy, they did not use the AMD Radeon 4000, which I think is either, I don't know, a timing issue or just a total miss. Because when it comes to video editing, I mean, the 4000 is going to be a beast. It has 8 cores and 16 threads. And while you and I personally don't do a ton of editing, we have a lot of people who do. And when it comes to that workload specifically, whether it's transcoding or editing, taking out stupid things that I might say on this podcast, time is money. So I'm a little surprised. They did use AMD on the lower end, but my expectation is their competitors are going to jump on the 4000 series.
Yeah, we'll have to see. And thankfully, I'm not doing a ton of rendering and graphics, a little bit of live and a little bit of stream. So we'll see where that lands. But excited to check it out. And, I'd say this isn't a hard endorsement, but it's definitely hit that point now where more and more of the device manufacturers, PC makers are making products that are competitive for those creators that where Apple has typically won somewhat easily by a margin. So cool stuff.
Yeah. So speaking of NVIDIA, there was an article in Extreme Tech that talked about NVIDIA announcing no layoffs. In fact, I think they're actually giving bonuses, and that runs pretty counter to what you and I have seen. In fact, today Magic Leap announced that it was laying off 1,000 people, or 50% of its workforce. So you and I have been pretty brutal on Magic Leap previously, particularly around its consumer focus with augmented reality. When all the real action, he's running out of money. In fact, he had to put up financing to get his last and possibly final round of funding. But anyways, enough of that. NVIDIA really making some interesting moves here.
Yeah, well, companies have been trying, and remember Mark Benioff from Salesforce asked for a pact among tech to go 60, 90 days, no layoffs. We've heard Chuck Robbins from Cisco make a similar commitment. Satya Nadella has been outspoken. So a lot of companies are keeping people on. And in some cases, that keeping people on is even in case of maybe included a furlough or less work. So it hasn't been all great and perfect, right? But the idea is, let's not put people on unemployment if we don't have to. There's a lot of backing from stimulus out there that companies do have access to, but tech as a whole isn't exactly decelerating either. And it's in a lot of ways it's growing, and this pandemic has only further influenced the need for investment, and that's kind of what CEO Jensen Huang talked about in his note. So. First of all, he talked about they're changing the review process. They're basically pulling it. They're not going to do the traditional annual reviews. He just said, with this condition, there's just no. How do you do that? How is this the right time to talk to people about whether or not they're getting their TPS reports in on time? Office Space joke for those of you that don't know it. And then when he got asked about whether he's planning a layoff, his essential response was, no. And in fact, it's the opposite. We're accelerating your raise. We're putting extra money in your pockets. He believes that by doing this, he's going to put tens of millions more dollars in the hands of families that work for Nvidia in the coming months. There's no layoffs. And he said the work we do in graphics science, AI, robotics is more vital to the future than ever. And I think he caught the essence of what's going on. These companies that are doing well, this should not be an opportunity to trim your workforce. This is not the time for greed. And again, it's the time for innovation. And this is the perfect time to be bringing new solutions. The technology in the company's GPUs, framework, software will enable the healthcare industry. It will enable enterprises. It will enable communications networks and platforms. It's critical work. It is truly critical work, the stuff that these chip makers are doing. We talked about this at a time about Intel, and it's equally as true for NVIDIA. So I say bravo to Jensen Huang. I think that was a really strong move. I'm happy for our friends at NVIDIA, the people we work with all the time. I'm glad they have a CEO and a boss that's so compassionate. And even if it is a little bit of a culture building exercise and an opportunistic moment, I'd say good decision, way to carry the torch forward. I think this is going to attract a lot of people to NVIDIA in the future. A lot of the top talent that maybe didn't have it on their radar might be looking to head that way based on a move like this from the company CEO.
Yeah, to your point on NVIDIA being kind of knee deep in COVID, Summit supercomputer that you and I talked to Dave Turek from IBM on is driven by NVIDIA silicon. And interestingly enough, NVIDIA had a conference call. Their CFO and their BU lead for graphics was really talking about, hey, this work at home thing is actually helping us, because people are looking for higher level notebooks that they can use at home to use for work. And obviously there's been uplift in gaming, which is helping NVIDIA as well.
Yeah, NVIDIA had those GeForce Pro, the new laptops. They had 100 commitments, and some starting as low as like $999 on some of their higher end graphics cards, which, with right now the shortage, with people needing updated notebooks to do the remote work, small businesses, individuals, families, what a nice compromise, though. That technology is a really nice compromise for the family that's streaming, gaming, and working on a single device. So certainly the company's got some things going on for it. And Pat, I was I'm pleased, and I've been pleased continuously by the solidarity and commitments made by the tech industry, because I know sometimes we get a little bit of a bad name because it is an industry that grows and expands and controls the world in a lot of ways. I mean, tech sort of runs the world. What do we say? Chips eat the world, but everything's on chips. But you know what? Right now, we'd be in a world of hurt if we didn't have the technology we have.
Yeah, I'm reading an interesting book called Truman, and there were steel barons and railroad barons, and right now we really have tech barons in 2020. And you're right, we deservedly get a lot of slack for particularly privacy and security, but it's nice to see people giving back. So let's move on to a major device announcement. Samsung announced a new A series smartphone. So if you track smartphones globally, Samsung has done really well in mid-range offerings. Here in the US, right, we think about the Fold, we think about the S10, we think about the Z Flip, things like that are $1,000 or $1,300. What Samsung did is they actually brought out a new set of smartphones into the US starting at $109. Which will get you a dual camera all the way up to what's called a Galaxy A51, and for $499 has 5G. And I'm not going to go into the guts of what's in my Forbes article, but I did think that there were a few trends here. So first of all, Samsung didn't decide because of COVID to bring this in, but it certainly is great timing. They beat Apple to the punch, in fact, with their new SE lower priced version on this. And I think we very well could see the average price points of phones going down. And it's one of the areas that I think is at the biggest risk, which is consumer discretionary spending. Think about this. I mean, let's say you're a parent and you have kids, and it's the decision between Johnny needs a new phone, or are you going to eat or pay the rent for the month? And I haven't seen these ridiculous, amazing financing deals yet come up, which, by the way, could take the market the other way. But we have to go with the information that we have. So the timing going from $109 to $499 for a 5G phone, I think is a big deal. So currently in the US, you have people, you have knockoff brands, you have house brands, you have brands like TCL that are low end. LG is in the mid range. You have OnePlus, who's entered with T-Mobile. This Samsung line is going directly out of that. Just to give you an idea, these are not horrible cameras. Like the Galaxy A21 has 4 lenses. It's a 4 camera lineup, and it starts at $249. So we're not talking about some reject phone or some used phone. The other thing I want to hit on is 5G for $499. I think, Daniel, it's the A51 5G model, and there's a larger one called the A71 5G for $599. But you and I have both pontificated either verbally or in writing about how 5G is going to come. And by the way, that $499 price point, you get sub-6 and you get millimeter wave. We haven't seen carrier announcements yet because these won't be available till back to school.
So those are 2 phones, sub $500 with 5G in them.
Yeah, actually, one is the A51 5G. It's $499, and then you get a larger display for $599. But still, the cheapest 5G phone you can get today is around $1,000.
I mean, so here's my take, right? The market is responding to Apple's new iPhone SE. Apple put their most powerful chip in their new iPhone at $400 and basically said, we dare the world not to use Apple. And my point is, I even said this to my kids. I'm like, how do you feel about the new SE? I'm like, the thing's got better tech in it than your 11 because it's got the Pro Max tech in it. I said, and they kind of frowned at me. I'm like, well, just so you know, just because it's not $1,200 doesn't mean it's not a great device. And I think Samsung's really testing the world. There's a huge percentage of the world that does not have a device and cannot afford an S20 or a Z Flip, but wants the features. And that's pretty darn compelling for a 2-camera setup with a smartphone with an Android operating system for, what'd you say, $109 or $129?
Yeah.
I mean,
for $109, you get dual lens camera, 13 megapixel, 3,000 milliamp battery, and 16 gigs of storage. That at that price point, what you're likely going to do is put an SD card in there to get more storage, because 16 gigs is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's not a lot of storage. It's although at one time that would have felt like quite a bit. But the point more here is, Pat, is you're talking about market penetration. And basically, Samsung looks to me like they're getting out in front of the competition and saying, look, they can come out with a $400 phone. We can put a pretty nice product out there under $200, closer to $100. And if you want a product for high penetration in markets like India, in Africa, where you have volumes of people that do not have devices or do not have up-to-date devices, there's a significant opportunity. And you know what? In the post-pandemic recession depression, when people are needing to upgrade and update devices, it might be attractive to have an option that's not 300, 500, 700, but actually around $100. This also empowers the carriers as 5G comes out to offer non-5G plans with phones for much lower prices. Where remember in the old days where the phone was baked in, you didn't buy the phones. This could be an opportunity for some companies to go back towards that model again, which was very attractive because people liked to it's the everything as a service mentality. I don't want a big giant debt in my phone bill. I want that portability. I want the phone to be paid for with my plan. So there's a bunch of things going on. I'd say some smart moves by Samsung. It'll be interesting, Pat, to watch Ken Elise and the numbers and the volume of seeing these phones. And of course, the only downside of it all, if you had to find a downside, is cannibalizing its own market. Is how many higher end phones will it lose because some of these mid-range phones are really, really good.
Yeah, it's interesting. Samsung, the reason that they're number one in units is because they take the A series globally. They just hadn't brought it to the United States. And I think the biggest danger here are going to be people like LG, who operate in that price point, TCL, who operate in that price point. So, no, it's good analysis. I'm really excited about the $499 5G. I think it will make a difference. And when Apple shows up with, I don't know, a $1,200 phone with 5G, it is going to look a little bit funny. Daniel, let's move over to our last topic, Alibaba. Jack Ma came out and made a big proclaimed a $28 billion investment over the next 3 years.
Yeah, so the company, Pat, struggled in the post-COVID wake as companies were trying to get back online and infrastructure got tapped hard, and it basically got brought to its knees. And Pat, this is a story we kind of heard incrementally over the last 2 months. Companies that had outages due to cloud capacity. And, you never think of these giant cloud providers as running into capacity issues, but they have. And so Alibaba is no exception to that. So the company's looking over the next 3 years to expand its infrastructure investments by $28 billion. But not just infrastructure. If you're not just thinking compute, server, storage, they're also looking, Pat, it says expanding their own development of chips.
Right.
And I'm just trying to look, but also and I guess the accelerators, which are kind of the same, ASICs and their own chips, which is something you and I've talked about on an ongoing basis throughout the last couple of years, that these large hyperscale cloud companies are using technologies, whether it's Taiwanese manufacturing, whether it's been ARM, but in partnership to develop cheap task-specific accelerator chips that help the companies do certain things, like in Alibaba's case, engines for recommending products and services to the people buying on Singles Day and every other day. And so, I think while this news itself is, you'd expect these companies to be spending it, I think there's two really important pieces of analysis here. One, the biggest cloud providers have a ways to go to handle the exponential growth in use that's coming. This pandemic has actually shown the voluminous use that could come in the coming years as enterprises truly digitally transform. The second piece of this is the growth in infrastructure for a lot of these companies comes down to more than just hardware, especially more than just data center hardware, but it really comes down to these companies making significant investments in building silicon that's going to be workload derived to help these companies do what they do better and more efficiently than general purpose computing, which obviously will have a wake to certain chip manufacturers, or will create a whole new market amongst your current chip manufacturers to build more of these kinds of ASICs to try to steer cloud providers or smaller cloud providers away from taking that path on their own. But thought it was really interesting to see that there has been an effect, and technology is not infinitely scalable, and that companies are going to have to pour some resources back in, because if you're going to amp up your company's transformation, which is going to have a public cloud element almost certainly, you're going to have to pay attention to your cloud provider and how much they're expanding capacity to be able to support the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so Alibaba is similar to AWS, and they have about, they have 40% IaaS market share in China. And I kind of see this as a copy of paste. Now, what's different from Chinese cloud providers is that unlike US providers, they still buy from name brand OEMs, as opposed to working closely with ODMs. And you can't just do the ODM play like AWS without a major investment going in. And it sounds like AWS, they're investing a ton into their own silicon. We saw AWS Graviton 2, we saw AWS Inferentia, and their entire offload silicon that does security and networking for AWS is completely homegrown. What was interesting is that they were selling less. Traffic was down, but they decided to say that they're going to make this investment now when they probably don't need it. That same article talked about how down their sales were, but in a very interesting move. And my final comment is, this also seems like the balkanization of the China cloud market, where Chinese companies are going to do stuff in China, and Western companies are going to do more of their stuff in the West.
Yeah, that's a great point, Pat. I think Alibaba, if I was looking it up correctly, has something like 46% of the overall cloud market in China. And as you're seeing, there's definitely like an east-west when it comes to tech. And it sort of seems the line gets drawn somewhere around London. And, we're seeing it right now with the deployment of 5G, right? Because all the Western countries have pretty much steadfastly said, we're going to not go with Huawei for our 5G. And then the countries in between on that border seem to be unsure of whether or not, their intention is to stick with Huawei or go with a different provider, whether that be Ericsson, Cisco, Nokia, a combination of all of the above. But I think a company like Alibaba, this is really also, Pat, another time where big, giant, fortunate companies with almost endless resources can do something good.
Right.
And spend the money. Spend the money, because that money goes back into the economy. It goes to the suppliers. It goes to the workers. It keeps the supply chain and rolling. And big tech is a powerhouse for that. So it's not I'm not making this a political message. I'm just saying that it's kind of like the market. I always say buy when it's down. Well, this is a time where I bet you anything, Alibaba's dollars can go a longer way as it amps up for its next explosive growth. And I expect that company and the cloud industry as a whole to grow. So no reason not to start making the investments now.
Yeah, Daniel, the tech show must go on, which might be the headline for this podcast as we move from COVID-related analysis to just getting back to business, right? Hallelujah. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. Daniel Newman and I thank you a lot. If you like the show, please subscribe to our YouTube and also our podcast. For Daniel and Patrick, we're out of here.